The scaling dilemma. What exactly is scaling? Well, if you read popular definitions of it, it boils down to the ability to drive agile, not only at the team level, but also at other levels of the organization, levels that include program and portfolio, even while those terms are not necessarily used. When you take a look at a lot of the definitions of agile, understand that no matter how good a framework supposedly is, you still need the people behind the framework to be great communicators, great collaborators, and hungry to learn from empirical methods and use those empirical measurements to improve. So when I look at scaling, I try not to get carried away with the framework, whatever it's called. But my first question is, have you tried to descale? And what that means is, have you taken this big mass of work that you're looking to scale up to, and have you tried to break it down into work that is more autonomous and has less dependencies between that work? Also, are you willing to sacrifice centralized leadership in favor of decentralized leadership and team autonomy? First, approach the work from that angle before jumping on any bandwagon that exists. Now, when I talk about scaling, I like simple models to stay true to the spirit and the heart of Agile. A lot of times when we think about scaling, we fall into the trap of names that we might have heard and frameworks that we might know about. But I want you to really examine any framework that you want to use to scale and ask the underlying question: how true is this to the heart of Agile? Now, the heart of Agile, if you Google it, it's a concept from Alistair Cockburn. But the four words that reflect the heart of Agile: collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve. And as I said in the beginning, empiricism is huge. That's reflect and improve. The team autonomy and the decentralized leadership is the collaborate. So how much have you considered these things? One of the frameworks that I'm about to talk about starts the discussion with this image on the screen. But taking a look at this chart, you find yourself in four quadrants when you're trying to scale. The first quadrant here is you have one team, maybe two, not more than that, and you have one product. In this situation, Scrum could be used. When we talk about the world of Scrum, we're usually referring to not more than 10 people. So if you're working one product and you have up to 20 people, Scrum can still be used. It may not necessarily be a scaling situation. Now, in the next quadrant, we have more than one product and between 1 to 2 teams. It could be painful the more products you throw into the mix. So if you have more than one product and you have one team or 2 teams, it could be painful, but it's still manageable. Again, not a scaling situation. My question to you would be, does your situation fit one of these where you have one product and between 1 and 2 teams, or more than one product and 1 to 2 teams? The third quadrant here is when we have more than one product and 2 teams and more. The question is, does your scaling situation fit into greater than one product and greater than 2 teams? Because if it does, that's more of a program and portfolio management situation, which is not a problem to handle. It does require some effort and some intentionality, but it's not a scaling situation. Program and portfolio management had been on the scene much longer than this whole topic of scaling. So if you're thinking that you need to scale in order to apply program and portfolio management, think again. The final quadrant here is where you do indeed need some thought for scaling. And this is where you have greater than 2 teams, but one product. One product backlog, greater than 2 teams. In a situation like this, scaling does make sense for a framework, but I certainly do not encourage the use of the word scaling agile, because agile is not a framework. Agile is a way of thinking, and it's a state of mind, and it's an ability to pivot accordingly to complexity and change happening around you. So I don't like the word scaling used for agile. I would rather use the word scaling for a specific framework. And for that reason, we're going to talk about scaling Scrum with Nexus. The question is, what is Nexus? Nexus is a lightweight scaling framework for Scrum. Let's break it down. A Nexus is a group of approximately 3 to 9 Scrum teams that work together to deliver a single product. It is a connection between people and things. It has a single product owner who manages a single product backlog from which the Scrum teams work. The Nexus Framework defines the accountabilities, events, and artifacts that bind and weave together the work of the Scrum teams in a Nexus. What I really like about Nexus is it builds on the simplicity of Scrum's foundation. And a lot of these parts that we'll explore are familiar because you've seen them before. At its heart, Nexus seeks to preserve and enhance Scrum's foundational bottom-up intelligence and empiricism, while enabling a group of Scrum teams to deliver more value than can be achieved by a single team. And the goal of Nexus is to scale the value that a group of Scrum teams working on a single product is able to deliver. And this is done by reducing the complexity that those teams encounter as they collaborate to deliver an integrated, valuable, useful product increment, at least once every sprint. The Nexus Framework helps teams solve common scaling challenges like reducing cross-team dependencies, preserving team self-management, and transparency. These dependencies are often caused by mismatches related to product structure and communication structure. By product structure, we're talking about the degree to which different concerns are independently separated in the product. This will affect the complexity of creating an integrated product release. And by communication structure, we're talking about the way that people communicate within and between the teams, because this affects the ability to get work done. So at the end of the day, a lot of success in any framework, as I said previously, boils down to great communication. Nexus provides opportunities to change the process, the product structure, and communication structure to reduce or remove those dependencies. While often counterintuitive, scaling the value that is delivered does not always require adding more people. Increasing the number of people and the size of a product increases complexity and dependencies, the need for collaboration, and the number of communication pathways involved in making decisions. Scaling down, reducing the number of people who work on something, can be an important practice in delivering more value. The Nexus Framework again builds on Scrum by enhancing those foundational elements. Let's jump straight into what exactly this looks like. So the very first thing that you see, very familiar, is the concept of a product backlog. But here we have the backlog refinement event being mandatory. This is something that we do. On top of the product backlog being refined, the next step is Nexus sprint planning. And the result of Nexus sprint planning is a Nexus sprint backlog. And this is the sprint backlog that will be worked on by the multiple teams involved, but each of these teams has its own sprint backlog, which makes up the Nexus sprint backlog. What happens as usual is the work progresses. We have integration of work happening on a daily basis. We have a team called the Nexus integration team, and the Nexus integration team are responsible for ensuring the delivery at the end of each sprint of an increment of that work that is integrated. One of the things that you see modeled from Scrum is the Nexus Daily Scrum. The Nexus Daily Scrum consists of the Nexus team, and after the Nexus team has met on a daily level to talk about any impediments at a high level, those are tackled individually in the daily scrums of each team within the Nexus. At the end, there's an integrated increment, which is inspected in a Nexus sprint review. The Nexus sprint review replaces the sprint review that happens with teams at the individual level as you have in Scrum. At the end of the day, there will be a Nexus sprint retrospective. The Nexus sprint retrospective at the end of the day helps identify what needs to be improved and how. Now, going a step further, it is important that you realize from the Nexus sprint review, we also have a feedback loop going into the product backlog for refinement, as would be expected. Because remember, the sprint review typically is not just for inspection. It is also used to better understand the solution and generate new stories or new requests. Let's talk about some accountabilities in Nexus. A Nexus consists of Scrum teams that work together towards a product goal. The Scrum framework defines 3 sets of accountabilities in a Scrum team: developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. And these accountabilities are talked about in the Scrum Guide. If you need to read that more, go on down to scrumguides.org and you can read that. In Nexus, as I said previously, an additional accountability is introduced, and we call this the Nexus integration team. The Nexus integration team is accountable for ensuring that a done integrated increment, the combined work completed by a Nexus, is produced at least once a sprint. It provides the focus that makes possible the accountability of multiple Scrum teams to come together to create valuable, useful increments. While Scrum teams address integration issues within the Nexus integration team provides a focal point of integration for the Nexus. Integration includes addressing technical and non-technical cross-functional team constraints that may impede a Nexus's ability to deliver a constantly integrated increment. The product owner, Scrum Master, and the appropriate members from the Scrum teams belong to the Nexus integration team. Appropriate members are the people with the necessary skills and knowledge to help resolve the issues the Nexus faces at any point in time. Composition of the Nexus integration team may change over time to reflect the current needs of a Nexus. Composition of the Nexus team may change over time, and common activities the Nexus integration team might perform include coaching, consulting, and highlighting awareness of dependencies and cross-team issues. One of the major fixtures in the integration team is the product owner. The Nexus is all about working off a single product backlog. And as it is in Scrum, we have a product owner. The product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the product and the work performed and integrated by the Scrum team in a Nexus. The product owner is also accountable for effective product backlog management, and how this is done varies widely across Nexuses, Scrum teams, and individuals. And then we have a Scrum Master, and the Scrum Master in the Nexus integration team is accountable for ensuring the Nexus framework is understood and enacted as described in the Nexus Guide. By the way, the Nexus guide is available on Ken Schwaber's website, scrum.org. You can find it there freely. And this is one of the things I like about the scaling model, because you can see that this is really to help individuals. There's absolutely no fee or cost for learning, understanding, and mastering this. And I dare say that the certification that comes behind scaling Scrum using the Nexus is extremely low cost compared to others. It's under $275 at the moment. And these are some of the things I like about this framework, because if you wanted to adopt it, you're not going to pay an arm and a leg every year as other frameworks demand that you do. But the Scrum Master, going back to our discussion here, may also be a Scrum Master in one or more of the Scrum teams. So the Nexus's Scrum Master could be someone who belongs to a Scrum team or not. In addition to this, we have one or more Nexus integration team members. The Nexus integration team often consists of Scrum team members who help the Scrum teams to adopt tools and practices that contribute to the Scrum team's ability to deliver a valuable and useful integrated increment that frequently meets the definition of done. The Nexus integration team is responsible for coaching and guiding the Scrum teams to acquire, implement, and learn practices and tools that improve their ability to produce a valuable, useful increment. Membership in the Nexus integration team takes precedence over individual Scrum team membership. As long as their Nexus integration team responsibility is satisfied, they can work as team members of their respective Scrum teams. This preference helps ensure that the work to resolve issues affecting multiple teams has priority. Let's talk about Nexus events. Nexus adds to or extends the events defined by Scrum. So if you already have a firm grasp on the 5 major events in Scrum, then you'll be able to build on this quite easily. At scale, it may not be practical for all members of the Nexus to participate, to share information, or to come to an agreement, except where noted. These Nexus events are attended by whichever members of the Nexus are needed to achieve the intended outcome of the event most effectively. Also talking about these events, they are time boxed in addition to their corresponding Scrum events. Let's talk about the first one, the sprint. A sprint in Nexus is the same as in Scrum. The Scrum teams in the Nexus produce a single integrated increment. Now let's talk about cross-team refinement. We often refer to backlog refinement as an optional step in the world of Scrum, but in the world of Nexus, this becomes a mandatory step. Cross-team refinement of the product backlog reduces or eliminates cross-team dependencies within a Nexus. The product backlog must be decomposed so that dependencies are transparent, identified across teams, and removed or minimized. Product backlog items pass through different levels of decomposition, from very large and vague requests to actionable work that a single Scrum team could deliver inside a sprint. Cross-team refinement of the product backlog at scale serves a dual purpose. It helps the Scrum team forecast which team will deliver which product backlog items, and it identifies dependencies across those teams. Cross-team refinement is ongoing. The frequency, duration, and attendance of cross-team refinement varies to optimize these two purposes. Where needed, each Scrum team will continue their own refinement in order for the product backlog items to be ready for selection in a Nexus sprint planning event. An adequately refined product backlog will minimize the emergence of new dependencies during Nexus sprint planning. Nexus sprint planning, and the purpose of this is to coordinate activities of all Scrum teams within a Nexus for a single sprint. Appropriate representatives from each Scrum team and the product owner meet to plan the sprint. The result of Nexus sprint planning is a Nexus sprint goal that aligns with the product goal, a sprint goal for each Scrum team that aligns with the Nexus sprint goal, and a single Nexus sprint backlog that represents the work of the Nexus towards the Nexus sprint goal, and a sprint backlog for each Scrum team, which makes transparent the work that they will do in support of the Nexus sprint goal. Let's talk about the next thing, the Nexus Daily Scrum. The purpose of the Nexus Daily Scrum is to identify any integration issues. This comes first before the individual Scrum teams meet for their daily Scrum. Appropriate representatives from the Scrum teams attend the Nexus Daily Scrum, inspect the current state of the integrated increment, and identify integration issues and newly discovered cross-team dependencies or impacts. Each Scrum team's daily Scrum complements the Nexus Daily Scrum by creating plans for the day focused primarily on addressing the integration issues raised during the Nexus Daily Scrum. So I really want to make it clear, when you're thinking about this framework, you need to think about the product backlog for these multiple teams being refined consistently. You also need to think about Nexus sprint planning, which is going to happen, in addition to the sprint planning of the individual teams working. And then when you hit the sprint itself for the multiple teams working to integrate, you must also recognize that there's a Nexus Daily Scrum in addition to the individual teams' daily Scrums. So this is a very convenient way of scaling the framework so that there's minimum pieces added to this already great framework known as Scrum. A lot of the frameworks that we see outside of this have a lot of burden, a lot of moving pieces that could otherwise be forgotten or whittled down. Nexus does not make that mistake. The Nexus Daily Scrum is not the only time Scrum teams in the Nexus are allowed to adjust their plan. Cross-team communication can occur throughout the day for more detailed discussions about adapting or replanning the rest of the sprint's work. So again, you see flexibility in this scaling framework. Let's talk about Nexus Sprint Review. The Nexus Sprint Review, like I said, replaces the sprint review of individual Scrum teams that happens in Scrum for a single team. The Nexus Sprint Review is held at the end of the sprint to provide feedback on the integrated increment. Since the entire integrated increment is the focus for capturing feedback from stakeholders, this replaces the individual Scrum team sprint reviews. During the event, Nexus presents the results to the stakeholders, and this is where we show all completed work in detail, or maybe we don't have all the completed work to show. Perhaps some things didn't get done, but the bottom line is progress is discussed. Based on this information, attendees collaborate on what the Nexus should do to address the feedback. The product backlog, as I showed in the previous image, could be adjusted. And this is one of the joys of Scrum. It's the empirical data that is used and the feedback loops that we get from the Nexus Sprint Retrospective and the Nexus Sprint Review into the product backlog for actions. This is all about constant improvement. Again, it is not a rigid style. It's not a rigid approach, but it is one of great collaboration between team members. Moving forward again in our Nexus Sprint Review, as I said, the entire integrated increment is the focus, the key word being integrated. Finally, let's talk about the Nexus Sprint Retrospective, and the purpose of this is to plan how to increase quality and effectiveness. The Nexus inspects how the last sprint went with regards to individual, teams, interactions, processes, and tools. In addition to individual team improvements, the Scrum Team Sprint Retrospectives complement the Nexus Sprint Retrospective by using bottom-up intelligence to focus on issues that affect the Nexus as a whole. So you could think about it like this. When we have a Nexus Sprint Retrospective, we could have a Nexus Retrospective to understand what the overarching issues or opportunities might be at this team level for improvement. Then we could have the Scrum retrospective more at a team level to address the findings that we got in our Nexus retrospective. And finally, there's going to be another input into a wrap-up in the retrospective. And the Nexus retrospective concludes the sprint. So when you're thinking about your Nexus retrospective, you think about it in these layers. Overall, 3 pieces: 1, to understand what's at play; a second, to address it at the team level with all the teams meeting; and lastly, a collection to pour back into the overall retrospective understanding. The Nexus Sprint Retrospective is the concluding point of the sprint. Let's talk about Nexus artifacts and commitments. Artifacts represent work or value and are designed to maximize transparency as described in the Scrum Guide. The Nexus integration team works with the Scrum team with a Nexus to ensure that transparency is achieved across all artifacts and that the state of the integrated increment is widely understood. Nexus extends Scrum with the following artifacts, and each artifact contains a commitment as indicated. These commitments exist to reinforce empiricism and the Scrum value for the Nexus and its stakeholders. So again, we have a single product backlog as described earlier. We have a Nexus Sprint backlog, which is a composite of the Nexus Sprint goal and product backlog items from the Scrum teams, individual Scrum teams. So one Nexus Sprint backlog that consists of smaller backlogs, sprint backlogs for each team. And commitment is a Nexus Sprint goal. The commitment for the Nexus Sprint backlog is the Nexus Sprint goal. The Nexus Sprint goal is a single objective for the entire Nexus, and it's the sum of all the work and sprint goals of the Scrum teams within the Nexus. We also have the integrated increment, which I've mentioned a few times, and this represents the current sum of all integrated work completed by a Nexus towards the product goal. It's also very important that we have the definition of done, which defines the state of the integrated work when it meets the quality and measures required for the product. Do not confuse this with the individual acceptance criterion for each of the stories or requests that are talked about in the product backlog. The end note, Scrum, as far as the Nexus guide to scaling Scrum, is free. You can find this on Ken Schwaber's website. A lot of individuals worked on this. I believe they did a great job in making it simple to understand, straightforward. At that 40,000-foot view, it has very little complexity. Now, as you begin to go into the layers of how individuals interact and work, that is where you find more robustness. So for anyone who thinks the Nexus is a lightweight and therefore not effective framework, you are mistaken. The power in Nexus comes from the interactions of the individuals. And this espouses the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It is not and should not be about processes and tools. While those have their place, instead, scaling a framework should be about the individuals and interactions, giving them a robust enough framework to interact, while at the same time staying true to the Agile Manifesto. I have to tell you, my friends, that the Agile frameworks being used in today's environment are not all true to the Agile Manifesto. Some of them use centralized control. Some of them focus on implementation as a big bang push. Some of them are horrendously, overwhelmingly big, very waterfallish, and I dare say extremely prescriptive, which makes you ask the question, is this really agile? And you should challenge the status quo in companies where you are being told, thou shalt use this framework to scale. You should always ask the question, is this truly agile? Because it's big and prescriptive and does not fit the Agile Manifesto test. Another downside is some of these frameworks use big batches. There's lack of a transparent and clear connection to customers and end users. Instead, you want a model that is autonomous, people-driven, emphasizing the importance of culture and transparency and inspection and adaptation. So if you are looking for a model, my friends, you're looking for a framework that will help you to effectively scale work in your company, I encourage you to look into the Nexus Guide, the Scaled Professional Scrum Approach. Now, this is not the only way. I want to make it really clear. I'm not saying this is the only way, but it is a very good beginning. And for me, especially to those of you I've trained, coached, and mentored, this is a less tasking, for lack of a better word, framework that you can immediately adapt. The overhead needed for this is negligible. The extra effort, again, compared to a lot of predictive models, is negligible. Coming from a very predictive heavy background, working in humongous organizations with tens of thousands of individuals and very heavy process, my advice to you is, if you want to scale, keep it simple. If you want to scale a framework for one product across multiple teams, keep it simple. It's already complex enough having a very huge backlog, probably. Or maybe some of the things I have shared with you will make you think about descaling, maybe using less people, maybe sacrificing that hunger to deliver in so much speed while missing out on staying true to the Agile Manifesto. All right. If you want to know more about this, like I said, going down to Ken Schwaber's website. I do not work, disclaimer, for Ken Schwaber's web team or website. This is my own perception that has been formed and framed from my own project and development experiences. Okay. If you're one of my students, I highly urge you to read this guide. And at the same time, I highly urge you to not fall into the trap. Do not blindly follow, because in my perception and in my understanding, and I have been studying this for a while, I do not see any value in the long run. I'm talking about in the long run in organizations in adopting frameworks that are what I described. Okay. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Put a comment below and I'll get back to you. Again, this is my opinion that I've formed over the years. I got certified as a certified Scrum Master in 2011, and that's 11 years ago. And it took me roughly 9 years to form my opinion about Agile, about Scrum, and about scaling. Now, as a good Agilist, you should always ask the question, what is a proof that this actually does work? Well, here are some white papers and some documented examples and testimonials from companies that have used this framework. eImagine uses Nexus to replace legacy systems and manage scale. eImagine is a full-service Indianapolis, US-based information technology consulting company founded in 1998 They strive to consistently exceed their clients' expectations and have a proven history of success with large-scale customers. The challenge: Scott Crane, COO, and President Laura Hansen, VP of Talent Solutions, were co-managing a large project for a state government agency that provided critical social services for senior citizens, such as Meals on Wheels, healthcare, and accessibility programs. They needed to replace a 20-year-old legacy product that was used as the database for end users, care managers, to track their work. The system had the following issues: business process driven by technology constraints, segregated information, manual processes, so on and so forth. Now, eImagine used Scrum for many years in previous engagements, but for this particular project, they had a team of 50 people and they were struggling. They had communication and transparency gaps. They felt the need to manage work better at that scale and looked into solutions, some of them too heavy and prescriptive, to help them manage their needs. After much research and self-learning using the scrum.org website, Laura achieved her scrum.org Scale Professional Scrum certification, and they decided to use Nexus to help their client. When eImagine started using Nexus, the 50-person group formed into 5 separate Scrum teams with unique areas of focus, with 1 Scrum Master per team in the Nexus. The product owner was on the client side, and there was an eImagine employee who worked closely. Now, I'll let you go on and read the entire thing, but the summary is our teams are no longer siloed as they were, said Crane. The NIT really focused Nexus integration team focused on helping us remove cross-team dependencies and improve collaboration between Scrum teams. So go on down there and read the rest. I'll put a link to some of these. The next one is a major Asian airline. They used the Nexus framework, and the business challenge was the airline senior leadership and business unit heads mandated a start to being agile in order to make the organization more adaptive. And it goes on into the framework, the solution. In order to address the integration challenges, this business unit adopted Nexus, a framework for scaling Scrum created by Ken Schwaber. And you can see the framework down there and you can read this. This was a business unit using Nexus for 40 people. So if you have any doubts that this indeed works, please go ahead and read some of these examples. Here's another one. Pentacom uses a Nexus framework to effectively deliver systems within the Ministry of Health in Poland that have been critical to providing services to patients during the post-COVID-19 pandemic. Pentacom designs innovative IT solutions, and the challenge was that Pentacom had been working with its clients, the Ministry of Health in Poland. The Ministry of Health had been working on these products that were mentioned for a decade, and they needed a new solution. The Ministry of Health tested different approaches for the development of e-health and decided Scrum was the best fit. As subsequent orders came from the client, 2 other teams were added. The bottom line is there's a total of 7 teams, and they added another 2 teams, which is totaling almost 100 developers across 9 Scrum teams to support the growing health system. To address these issues, Pentacom decided to implement the Nexus framework for the e-health initiative. They tested several other approaches before choosing Nexus, and the bottom line is it was used to scale this work that they had to do. Final one here is Terminal Scales software delivery with Nexus. Again, it's a company with a scaling challenge. They're out there in Peru trying to find a solution for the number of individuals that they had, 50 individuals, aiming to deliver software every 30 days. The bottom line is this framework gave them the flexibility and the efficiencies that they needed. Looking at the Nexus framework, as I said, it is really more of a skeleton that rests on a solid base of Scrum when it's practiced at its best. So why don't you take a read, go on down to scrum.org. Again, full disclaimer, I do not work for scrum.org. This is my own perception, but I really think this will help you in your scaling in your company, and you should look into it. If you have any questions about the certification, the Scaled Professional Scrum certification, do let me know. I'll give you my thoughts and ideas. This is a certification that I have taken, and it did a really great job in ensuring that the details that distinguish Nexus from Scrum at the team level are understood. So if you're able to pass this exam, the SPS exam, then it's a really good indication that you understand the major concepts around scaling Scrum. Okay, again, remember my initial thoughts. Scaling of Agile is, in my mind, not even a thing, because you do not scale a framework. Now, if we talk about scaling Scrum, now we're talking, because you can scale a framework, but the individual people, the people who are working on the team, they need that mindset for this to succeed, for any scaling approach to succeed. So I really want to stress that you do not scale a mindset, but you can scale a framework. You could scale training, but again, that mindset, it needs to be imbibed by the individuals themselves. Thank you very much, my friends. I wish you all the very best. Take care and bye for now.